Hello and welcome to the broadcast of selected presentations from the 2015 Organicology Conference. First up is the Crop Rotation Workshop with speakers Michael McMillan of Organically Grown Company, James Henderson of Hummingbird Wholesale, Pete Postlewait of Nature Fresh Farms, and Nick Andrews of the OSU Center for Small Farms and Community Food Systems.
Crop rotation. So it's a topic I'm always a little hesitant to approach, especially when we have an hour and a half, because it's huge and there's a million angles to come at it with. But the reason that it's coming up here today is we've been talking a lot lately about organic supply and what crops are in high demand. And this is a conversation that's happening regionally as well as nationally. And how many of you were at the Growing the Organic Market Intensive yesterday? Okay, so maybe 10 or so folks. So what we were really talking about is we were hearing from buyers about what their needs are and hearing from growers about some of their challenges scaling up and strategies that buyers are adopting to encourage transition and support what can be a really risky change and evolution of someone's farming practices. And as part of the conversation, a big part of the conversation, and a project that Tilt is really focusing on over the next year or two is trying to quantify the demand and what that looks like. So talking to buyers and getting some concrete numbers. How many tons of tomatoes do you need? What does it need to look like? What are your demands for grain and beans? Because we know there's these demands, but just telling a farmer that those demands exist isn't enough. We need to present clearly what those opportunities are. And so as part of this conversation, we're hearing what they are, but there's the bigger picture about how those crops fit into a farming system. So great, you know how to grow beans and maybe you're interested in extra income. Some of the crops are in the squash family or the brassica family, and so pests can be a challenge. And so crop rotation just keeps coming up when we're having this conversation. And so that's what we're here today to talk about. And I am joined by Michael McMillan, who is one of the sourcing managers for the Organically Grown Company. And they've been doing some longer-term thinking and projecting of what their needs are. They've obviously been working with organic growers for many years, helping growers kind of grow into the wholesale market as well. So he'll speak a little bit to his experience and observations there. We have James Henderson, who's the farmer liaison for Hummingbird Wholesale. They buy grains and beans and edible seed crops, and they've been very involved and engaged in this conversation. It's something they're really invested in, and they have a number of projects to support farmers and help kind of diversify their cropping systems. Pete Postlewait here is our farmer on the panel. He grows a diversity of crops in the Willamette Valley, and he'll speak a little bit to what their crop rotation looks like, how they go about making decisions of what to include and evaluating new crops for their system. And then we have Nick Andrews, who's with OSU Extension, and he'll speak to some of the challenges, the agronomic challenges, and other considerations that growers need to look at when they're evaluating crops. So we'll be passing the mic back and forth here, and I think we'll save questions till the end. And with that, I think I'll let Michael kick it off.
Cool. Thank you very much. There's a lot of familiar faces in the audience. It's a small world, let's say, and produce. Thank you very much, sir, for asking about the attendees from yesterday's presentation, the intensive. I thought it was a really good organization of ideas, and I wanted to just kind of not go too deep into some of the themes that were talked about yesterday, but touch on them and then lead in the direction of sharing some things that we're seeing as solutions or things that are working for, especially how do you grow the next generation of growers, or I think that there are some real questions about the financial implications to next generation growers getting into the market or growing into the market. So this is a brief presentation, but again, it's about some of the dynamics that we see in fresh market produce and how we can create some solutions for growers. So I think that the first concept is that markets are really fragile. There's a delicate equilibrium or balance to the volumes that growers produce and a sliding scale of pricing, if you will, that it takes to get those crops moved. And I think the goal of the marketer is to create the right balance between the amount of volume that our partner growers produce and creating pricing structures that return them enough money to stay economically sustainable. And produce is full of euphemisms, which are these funny little sayings, which there's a number of them, but one of them that is really appropriate to share here is called the race to the bottom. And anytime there's more product that's available from a variety of growers, let's say, there kind of tends to be this stair-stepped kind of approach towards lowering prices to figure out if you can sell more product. And while that may get crops moved, it doesn't necessarily return growers profitable or sustainable monies. And so the job of the marketer really should be to find and create and manage that equilibrium. And when growers look at getting into the market and doing moving into business, small, steady, incremental steps in this direction tend to be a little more sustainable than large forays in without a track record of performance. For the folks that were in the meeting yesterday, I was the one that was working with Sarah Lee Lawrence on the potatoes, and it was a wild ride. It was fun. It was sad at the same time, and I'm just excited that she did as well as she did. So it was a good thing. I've got a comment on the conventional industry here, and this is kind of in contrast to what I see working, which we'll get to at the end of this presentation. But in the conventional market and in the history of produce in Portland, Oregon, there are stories of growers that would get together. I mean, this is 3 generations ago. Growers would get together, they would collude on what the price of radishes were going to be for that time, and then they'd go back and they'd start working with their buyers and selling stuff. And invariably, one family would start selling below everybody else. And it would just, the conventional game is, I'm going to cut you out, or I'm going to get rid of you, I'm going to undercut you, or it's just this really, it still exists to this day, really. It's just not a collaborative environment. It's a very competitive environment. And I think why I'm in the organic industry, and I think why a lot of you are in the organic industry, is that we're much more focused on collaborating and creating success for everybody. So, in a nutshell, that's something that's out there. So again, to kind of quickly kind of go through the discussion yesterday, there's a lot of detail here, if you will, but these are the kinds of things that next generation growers are going to have to face. They're going to have to develop competencies to address if they want to have access to the fresh market. And OGC has a mission of working with small and mid-sized growers, and I'm kind of evolving that mantra into being independent and next generation growers. And the question is, if I'm not a multi-generational grower and I didn't inherit this infrastructure in this land and this experience, this expertise, how do I develop the financial wherewithal to develop these kind of competencies to work with the kind of accounts that could really create, or that could move volume and keep my business afloat? It's a real challenge. It's something that there isn't a crisp answer to, but I wanted to share some things that we're seeing working, and we'll get to that. And it's a shower hydrocooler at Desert Express in Brawley, Arizona is what this is. And just to kind of touch on these bullet points, this specialization, every fresh market crop increasingly has a specialized production system and a specialized post-harvest system that are required to meet the retail customers' execution requirements. Increasingly, labor is probably the largest elephant in the room of a variety of growers staying in business long term. It's something that we collectively have to work on. Food Safety Modernization Act and retail compliance requirements are a different level of detail management, I think, that is going to take some work for next generation growers to get at. And this marketing bullet is really, if you're not able to organize yourself in a way where your offering is in the same language that certain retailers speak, and you have all of these other things, you're not really going to be able to engage with them and access those markets. So.
Can you quickly define when you say small and mid-range farms, like what size are you talking about? Because I think that's different.
I think the question was, can I define small and mid-sized farms, or how I'm using that language? I think to simply say it, one of the trends that we see happening in the food industry is consolidation. I had some conversations with some processing individuals yesterday about there's like 2 broccoli processors left in the country. There is an enormous amount of venture capital money that's being put into blueberry and hazelnut production in Oregon. But what I mean by small and mid-sized growers, I would say between 5 and 300 acre growers. Ag in the middle is a term that's been used to describe independent growers that aren't necessarily in a corporate structure, although corporate structures can have their place. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Going next. So these are examples of crops. These are high value, high risk fresh market crops that have very large rotation requirements. There are. Everybody eat kale. Everybody eat kale.
Who doesn't eat kale?
I think Nick could actually kind of help us validate this, but I think OSU is now saying that basically 7-year rotations are what they recommend to manage club root. Club root is a gnarly disease. I mean, once it's in your field, it's there. It's not going to go away. Conventionally, they have tools to manage it. Organically, we don't. And again, to think of this next generation independent grower having the kind of land base to be able to rotate through to produce crops of volume through the infrastructure we described in the previous slide and have access to the market is a daunting challenge. So as we're kind of trying to do our future supply planning process, this is an example of a question where we need to expand our rotations to work with more growers to create that supply, and then the ultimate question is how do you do that? Potatoes are a 5-year rotation. Onions are the same. I mean, there are a number of diseases that are debilitating unless you're able to do that. And so really where I wanted to go with the solution sharing example of this in this idea is, I mean, Brent's in the back. Brent and Shelley from Fraserland, I think, are a really great working example of different growers that are coming together to have collaborative use of land, collaborative use of rotations. I mean, instead of having one grower with all the financial risk and responsibility of doing everything, how do you do more with a collaborative spirit of working together? How much land do you guys have as part of your rotation, Brent?
I would say 2,000 acres.
2,000 acres. So, that example, the 3-family partnership rotating through 2,000 acres is a kind of scale which is creating some flexibility, is creating some ability to do more specialization. In a conversation with him yesterday, he described some of the things that are working is each individual family taking on a portion of the production which they're able to own and develop the specialization into, which leads towards the success of the entire entity. And I wanted to offer this in contrast to what we started with the conventional model of, we're going to talk about the price of radishes, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to undercut you immediately. And it's a different world, it's a different idea, and long term, again, independent next generation growers, more of that kind of behavior is going to create the kind of kale rotations that we're going to need to be able to have supply and have it be a sustainable proposition in terms of disease cycle management. Another example that's similar to this that we've seen work is the Anderson operation, Brian Anderson in Othello, Washington. He's working through basically 5 growers to create the kinds of rotations that he needs to do fresh market onions. Jim Baird is one of the gentlemen he was here. Jim's one of those growers. It's a larger scale, if you will, but the model I think fits where Brian is specialized into drip irrigation systems, seed variety work, and then does kind of like a joint venture work with his growers to grow the crops, and then he has specialized into the packing arena and has done some collaborative marketing work with other entities. And so this is something that we're seeing working, and it is a way for growers to be insulated from, again, the financial risk of having to do all of that themselves, which we question the long-term validity of for, again, independent next generation growers. So in a nutshell, really, that's what I had to share, and we look forward to taking your questions in a little bit. So, and that's pretty much it. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks, Michael. So I'm going to pass it over to James Henderson now, who's going to talk a little bit about what Hummingbird has going on and what crops they're looking for.
We're a little bit different perhaps than OGC is with determining the price of products, because the vast majority of our products that we sell, the price is known to both the grower and the customer before it's even planted. And if somebody wants to plant extra and try to sell it to us, it's basically irrelevant. I kind of like it that way. It takes the stress out of everything. But it's different because also our products, wheat and barley and flax and pumpkin seed, will store. Your stuff will not store. So there's not the urgency involved. So I think that's a little bit different. As far as crop rotations, I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert on crop rotations, but I do know that you're not normally going to want to follow, wheat on wheat too much of the time, and that you need to have rotations in there with stuff like dry beans or garbanzo beans or hay or alfalfa or buckwheat. And if I don't have a source or a need for that, but I need the wheat from a farm, I will call up, OGC or Charlie's Produce or somebody else and say, well, can you contract for that 50 acres this year because I need the wheat the next year, So I kind of an indirect collaboration. I don't really get involved in the details. It's just, here's some land that's available, see what you can do type of thing. And Pete and his dad, they grow pumpkin seed for us for the last few years. And we also, Pete's agreed to do some experimentation from time to time with various crops just to see what they work, and that happens on a lot of other of our farms too, and throughout the state of Oregon and Washington. Well, they'll try a little bit of this or a little bit of that, and sometimes things take off and sometimes they don't. Like black barleys are starting to take off, and some new feed barleys that we are growing pretty successfully now, started with pretty small acreages. One of the things I'm looking forward to is speaking with Amy's Kitchen and perhaps some others about whether we can integrate their need for onions and potatoes on our growers' wheat farms down in the Klamath Basin. We've got several thousand organic acres down there that will be producing wheat for us going forward, but definitely need a rotation for that. And it's critically important that be a stable market for the grower and us. It kind of affects everybody. And what I have here on this PowerPoint isn't really anything specific, but it's just some pictures of crops that have a market. I'm not a real big believer in planting a cover crop just to say you planted a cover crop. It's a whole lot nicer if you could plant something and sell it, not just make money every 3 years. So that's basically what this is. How do you work this thing?
This is forward right here.
It's forward. Okay. Yeah. That's
Points it to the computer.
What computer? Okay. This is Charlie and Julie Tilt that own Hummingbird in front of our new warehouse we built in 2011. So one of our new bean rotations will probably ongoingly. This is down in Medford last year. New kind of yellow white bean called Canarely. It's real pretty. That took off. It's a Johnny's seed variety. So that's being rotated with barley in Medford presently. There's 500 acres of organic land down there, I think, and this is only just a 20-acre field. But we also rotate some specialty wheat. This is red fife, which is a really old-fashioned wheat from the 1840s. We're starting to sell a lot of. This is the first organic red fife that I think the Willamette Valley's seen since 1930. It's a high-protein, lower gluten wheat, which is kind of an odd thing to think about these days. But this is organic DNS Buck Toronto hard red spring wheat up in Milton Freewater that we mill into whole wheat flour. It goes to New Seasons markets and several other bakeries. Buy several 100,000 pounds of this from Tom and Ray each year. This is Doug Lewis, and Doug's here in the front row here today. This is his hard red winter wheat. Can't remember what year that was, Doug, but a couple years ago over in North Powder. I'm really impressed with our growers' ability to keep the weeds out of their organic crops just year after year after year for the most part, and it is doable. A lot of the wheat is rotated with alfalfa. This is back in Milton Freewater. This is alfalfa for seed. Ligus is kind of an issue with producing alfalfa seed, but the Williams, for the most part, have got that figured out. I think that's why they grow a lot of this alfalfa for forage genetics and us, and I think the nitrogen that's put in the ground is the reason I have such high protein wheat for the New Seasons market flour. Yeah, they also rotate in old-fashioned kind of corn. This is an old red cob corn that's sold to Fairhaven Flour Mill, and I think also to Bob's Red Mill. We then buy the cornmeal from Fairhaven, so indirectly I pay attention to whether he's planting corn or not because I protected my wheat ground. This is back in Junction City, where garbanzo beans are kind of a hit and miss crop. Seems like one year we do really well. This year was about 2,400 pounds an acre, but then you go the next year and have a disaster. It's only just a couple hundred pounds an acre. But this is a good rotation with grain crops. It puts a lot of nitrogen in the ground. It doesn't compete very well with weeds unless it takes off real quick, though. So we're still trying to figure out what the issues are with that ongoingly.
Don't have to irrigate it. It's a good point.
What's that?
Don't have to irrigate.
Don't irrigate it. Yeah, you don't have to irrigate it. Yeah. Also, lentils is a good rotation. This is some crimson lentils a few years ago in Junction City. And then rice. I don't know how many years we can plant wild rice in the same ground. This is up in Mount Angel, going on through 4 years now. If that's ever pulled out, it's, man, oh man, is it rich ground. Once you drain that and plant something else. So I'm thinking that would be great to either plant wheat or pumpkins into. There would be no weeds in it at all when that comes out of rice. It's been flooded for so many years. There's my little guys. In Junction City with rye and triticale. We got a dire need for rye right now, but none of the wheat farmers will touch it because they think it's a weed. And I think even the Canadians have stopped growing so much of it because now there's a shortage of rye, and there's a reality check out there about what rye ought to be worth. So you can see that the rye price is definitely going to be going up finally after years of doing nothing. And buckwheat, this is in Junction City, is planted as a rotation crop a lot. We buy currently our buckwheat from Sarah Lee, who spoke yesterday, from Rain Shadow Organics, and that's milled into buckwheat flour, and it also goes in the sprouting market. That pulls a lot of phosphorus up to the top couple inches of soil and does your following crop a lot of good. It's a very quick crop too, normally not planted until late June and harvested in late August or so. This is Pete's pumpkins a couple years back, and you might want to speak how that fits into your rotation. I don't know, Pete, but and just down the road from Pete, this is Steve Cook's place this year with our Hollis pumpkin seed production. It competes pretty well with weeds if you get the weeds out of it initially. They're very large plants and can pretty much keep the weeds out once it covers the ground. I think these are your beans here too, Pete, right? Green beans. I don't know who you're raising those for, but
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some of the new crops we're interested in that I think are great rotations, some black barleys and some feed barleys there that we're growing more and more of. Got a couple million pounds of these being on contract this year. And yeah, I think that's it. I don't know if I got any more in here. Nope, that's it. So yeah, this is some teff, an Ethiopian grain in Junction City last year. There's quite a bit of that being grown now. I think we'll probably this coming year there'll be over 1 million pounds of that produced in the Junction City area. Teff it's becoming like the place to go for teff of all places in the world. Junction City, Oregon. So that's about all I got.
Give me a party cheetah.
I was wondering if you could maybe just speak to grain root beans. You talked a bit about some of the larger acreage needs, but you and I have talked in the past about some of the specialty beans and what you might be looking for there and the acreage needs related to those.
Sure. So that's a completely different deal. We specialty beans like those yellow eyes, but I think actually that's going to be a bigger one because that's pretty popular. But other ones like tiger eyes or crimson lentils or orca beans or whatnot, we really only want 10 acres of them. But it's very difficult to go to the milk free water grower with a 3,200 acre farm and say I want 10 acres of orca beans, and they'd say no, you know. On the other hand, if you go to the vegetable growers that only have 50 acres and you say, I want 10 acres of orca beans, but I'll pay $1.50 a pound, they also say, no, it's not enough money. So it's really kind of tough to get these specialty items grown, and not just beans, but radish seed or broccoli seed. We'd really like to get that from here rather than Southern California or further away. Sometimes the radish seed comes from Canada, which I think is kind of ridiculous. I think part of the solution there, especially like in radish seed, where we only sell like 1,200 pounds of it a year, is to get another company involved that also sells radish seed, so that can contract with enough acreage for the farmer, so it makes sense to the farmer. So, yeah.
For those smaller specialty crops that you just want 10 acres of something for, are you willing to work with growers for, like we were talking yesterday about the equipment for harvesting the pumpkins? If somebody's growing 10 acres of beans, would you help them out with the equipment for harvesting beans if they didn't have that?
I'll sell them some bean pickers.
Yeah. So the question was, can we help out with harvesting logistics on small acreage crops? And we don't own any equipment ourselves, but we'd certainly do our level best to hook you up with somebody like Pete, and buy him a cup of coffee and say, get fuel over there, Pete, and harvest that for him. So that does actually happen quite a bit. So
I'm next. Well, I didn't bring a PowerPoint presentation, but my name is Pete Postlewait. I farm out of the Canby, Aurora area, about halfway between here and Salem, if you guys don't know where that's at. We raise a bunch of vegetable row crops for both processing and fresh, specialty crops, the seed crops, some ancient grains. When we look at how to rotate some of our acres and keep them in production, we try not just to look at, which is important, we just can't just look at how long has this crop been here and how many years before we can bring another crop back into it. But with all of the different dynamics with hand harvested crop, which we do a lot of, our labor bill runs many, many hundreds of thousands of dollars. We need to pay attention to how far is this field from our production facility, how long will it take to get our crew there and back, try to factor all of that in with our rotation, how much water is available on this farm versus other farms. We farm 14 different farms in that area, and not all of them are created equal. I wish they were, but we try to take that into consideration as well. And also the economic factor as far as is this a long-term crop we can raise? not just you wanting something as rotation, but was this something we can raise, grow a market for, and sustain that? Sometimes we can do that, and sometimes we can't. We've tried several crops in the past. They're good crops. They're just labor comes into effect. You know, it just costs too much to harvest them. I think we're really looking at here in Oregon the minimum wage going up. I think my personal view of it, I think we're going to land somewhere around the $12 range, and that's really going to have a huge impact on a lot of growers, especially in the organic industry, where you can't necessarily go out and spray chemicals for weed control. We're looking at a lot more mechanization. We have optical guide cultivators. Everything we can do to try to create a better mechanical system to eliminate our weed pressure is always huge. Any way we can faster facilitate harvest times, get our product into the production facility, that's where we seem to make up our time. In the field, it is what it is. We have guys doing a lot of what we're doing right here, talking and not really working. How we can keep the fastest way we can get that crop into the facility, where the belts are moving, tables are moving, boxes are moving out. They don't really have time to do that. It's found where we've tried to gain an advantage there. We work with Nick at OSU as far as the rotational crops for cover crop. A lot of our crops come off late fall, and so that presents a challenge as far as what we're able to plant back as a cover crop. We did annual rye this year, reluctantly, but that's one of our challenges. We raise a lot of silage corn for organic dairies as well, and by the time that crop's off, you're looking at almost into November sometimes. So it's it's challenging. And we try not to keep crops on top of themselves more than 2 or 3 years. We try to give them a 2 or 3 year break before we move back in, but it's sometimes we have to push that a little sooner than we would like. But James is always good at, hey, try this, and sometimes they work, and sometimes I praise James, and sometimes I cuss James.
Don't pick on me too much.
We've had experience with buckwheat.
Yeah.
Yes. No, not buckwheat.
No, you didn't. You won't do it yet.
Yeah. The garbanzo beans. That was one that looked good on paper. James, was telling us all the benefits for it, and so we planted it and had limited success. That was, he's like, well, and he tells me it grows really good over in Eastern Oregon. It's like, well, that's probably where it should be grown. But it
planted in a Christmas tree patch.
Yes, and that's part of our, I was getting there. Part of the issue with that crop, and it could have been with the, what was that other thing you tried getting us to raise?
Quinoa?
That quinoa. Planted, 8 million seeds of that, and 7 came up?
Mm-hmm.
7. Yeah, then they had a germ test, and they said we were doing good. It didn't germ so well. But
I've got 1,800 pounds an acre in seeding this year. It can be done.
But anyway, to James' defense, part of our trying to keep our rotation and everything intact, we have to purchase property or find some to lease. We bought more farms in the last 3 years, and one of them was 2 of them were Christmas tree farms, and I don't know, there's a special place in hell for Christmas tree growers. I mean, there's what they do is we could not figure out, what did you guys put on this? What did you spray? We don't spray anything. No, don't spray anything. I always assumed that they just fertilized around each tree, kind of like the nurserymen do, and there's just no fertilizer here. And I talked to him about, oh no, we don't fertilize Christmas trees. They grow the lengths would get too far away from us. So we haven't put fertilizer on this in 40 years. And so it took about 3 years to get the ground up to where I'm sure the garbanzos would grow perfectly now, James. But that was part and parcel, I think, is as some of the crops to James' defense. But it is that's, I don't know, it's what we've raised beans. We've done well in beans. We've done bad in beans. We've raised, we raised rhubarb. Rhubarb's a perennial crop. That was not going anywhere. We raised a lot of rhubarb. We raised a lot of pumpkin seeds. We do a lot of cucumbers. We do a ton of cukes, both pickling and slicing. In fact, I think we move Whole Foods, Safeway, Kroger's. We had 9 of the 17 Safeway distribution centers last year we serviced, so we do a lot of that. And, back to what Mike was saying, that fresh market is, I always, how fragile these markets are and how people are undercutting it. It truly is cannibalistic by nature. It's that seems to be kind of the I have to undercut you to survive, and there is a lot of that. The larger you play in certain arenas, as far as crops go, I think the better advantage you have. If you have a small acreage, it's hard to get attention from buyers to want to handle your product. In fact, I think the first time I called OGC to ask if they're interested in some organic rhubarb, they said no. I said, okay, you mind me asking why? They said, well, how many plants do you have? I said, well, there's 4,300 to an acre. And they said, whoa, you have acres of this? And I said, yeah. And they said, well, I'd like to come out on Monday. And they're used to, hey, I got 6 plants. And at that time, in 2004, we tried to sell just a few boxes every week or so was difficult. But we got in there, and that went well. So, I mean, and the market's really grown there. And I think with the labor, and it seems, you talk about the race to the bottom, a lot of these different, I know there's 6 preemptive measures in the Oregon State Legislature right now to try to allow the different municipalities and counties to set their own minimum wage. It's kind of like the race to the top. Seattle did the 15, and there's a lot of Washington want to do the 15. Maybe we can do better than 12. And it's without standing back and looking how that's going to impact agriculture as a whole. Is something you need to keep in mind as far as your rotations go as well.
Would you share some things about your policy work or your farm work?
Yeah, I sit on the state board of largest lobbying organization in Oregon, and we have 4 full-time lobbyists. We are constantly engaged in most all legislation that has to do with agriculture. I represent Clackamas and Multnomah counties on that board. We are constantly meet with the governor, meet with all the different legislators. I'm going to be back in D.C. I'm chairing the Food Safety Committee back there this year. I'll be back in D.C. from the 23rd to the 27th, speaking to that, trying to form how those rules are. And I've been engaged with that for the last 4 years, and I've chaired it the last 2. So it's and the FDA does listen to some extent. When you're back there and you bring some speakers to the bills out and wanting to try to clarify things. They do make some changes when you put things into perspective. And they actually come out and tour different farms. They have been a little more receptive than what I thought they would be initially. We were beneficial in getting the State Department of Ags to be kind of the enforcement of this instead of the FDA, because they're just simply not qualified to do some of this. They don't have the infrastructure, the logistics, and the background to really be able to monitor and enforce these new rules. Okay, that's it.
Thanks, Pete. So there's been a lot of great discussion about the logistics and the marketing and the labor and other issues, and a lot of interesting opportunities there with some crops that might be really good rotations for vegetable crops. And I work mainly with smaller scale, diverse vegetable growers. And the challenges with rotations that I focus on are generally more the biological challenges. So things like nutrient management, insect management, weed management, disease management, nematodes. So there's a whole lot there, and there's no way to address all of that in 10 minutes. But I wanted to just kind of go through a couple of key points and a couple of examples. This is Lindsay DeToit's slide from WSU. And her point is that we're in the field and we see a plant problem, and we want to manage that plant problem, but the biology of the organisms that are causing the problem are really different, and it's critical that we have an accurate diagnosis, and that's no small task. Usually with a lot of these issues, you can't, even if you're a pathologist, you can't diagnose the pathogen without getting them bred or cultured out in a laboratory and looked at under a microscope. So this is diagnosis really can't be underestimated, the importance of diagnosis, and it's humbling and a challenging task. So don't, I just want to encourage people not to get discouraged and to keep working on it. Steve Koike came to the North Willamette Horticulture Society meetings in January, and he's a plant pathologist down at UC Davis, and he said that in his view, farmers who solve problems most effectively are the fittest in the economy, and they survive or they thrive. And farmers that aren't good at solving problems tend to be outcompeted, or tend to not survive when times are harder. And I think a lot of their ideas become memes or ideas that spread and that we all begin to utilize. And so that the problem solving with diagnostics and then coming up with a good management plan for a plant health problem is one of the key things for being a successful farmer, as far as I can see. So you're trying to figure out what is wrong with the plant. And the frustrating thing a lot of the time is that you can't really do much about it when the first year that you see it. You have to remember the problem, remember where the problem occurred, figure out a pretty complex management strategy sometimes, and then keep track of all of that and figure out how to implement that management strategy. And often we don't have thresholds, so we don't necessarily know that our whatever management strategy we put into effect, we don't really know if it's going to be effective when we go ahead and plant the same crop again. So there's a lot of risk and a lot of uncertainty, but there is a lot of help in this stuff. Effective rotations really depend on, there's a lot of rules of thumb about rotate brassicas for so many years, rotate potatoes for so many years, but really it comes down to the pests that you're facing and the biology of those pests, how long they persist in the soil, what their alternative hosts are, and that sort of thing. And there's some key pests that I wanted to kind of give some examples, some key pests that can build up in a wide variety of broadleaf vegetables. And I think that there's a lot of fresh market rotations, especially in the Willamette Valley, that are susceptible to building up some of those pests with broad host ranges. So Steve Koike from Davis, he put those first two rotations on the screen last month, and he sort of said that these are common rotations in Salinas: lettuce, spinach, lettuce, cauliflower. So very, very tight rotation. A little bit better, lettuce, spring mix, arugula, lettuce, broccoli, celery, lettuce. So there in 7 years, you've got 2 years of brassicas, but then half of those spring mix leafy greens are brassicas as well. So clearly you can build up lettuce problems in lettuce crops and problems in brassica crops with a rotation like that. So it's a high risk. Coming to the Willamette Valley, a friend of mine, this is his rotation that he uses: cauliflower, winter squash, lettuce, winter cabbage, winter squash, and then back to year one. So that's you've got 2 years of brassicas and 2 years of cucurbits in there, and so probably, not necessarily, but probably a high risk that there's going to be some disease issues occurring, and he's seen some of that. And rotation isn't the only way to deal with some of those problems, but sometimes it's the only way, and usually it's an important part of the management strategy. The processed veg growers, this is a couple of processed veg rotations: field corn, sweet corn, snap bean, winter squash, cauliflower, and then back to year one. And that's a little bit broader rotation, The second to the bottom row there, fescue grass seed for years, then winter sweet corn, snap bean, winter squash, cauliflower. That's really getting into a broader rotation. That's probably going to avoid some persistent pest or disease buildup. But it's a lot easier for me to sit up here and say lengthen your rotation than it is to implement it. I mean, Pete, has talked about, or one of the audience members talked about specialized equipment. That's a tough one. The expertise, the market, all those things make it difficult. Wintergreen Farm down in Notai, they have about 3 years. They've been trying to extend their rotation to a 6-year rotation, and they've got beef cows, so they've got 3 years of grass clover, and then brassicas, cucurbits, and lettuce are typical for their vegetable rotations, and that seems to be generally, in general terms, a pretty low risk rotation for building up soil diseases. One of the most, we don't see a whole lot of verticillium wilt in the Willamette Valley that I'm aware of, but it's a really challenging disease. It tends to like neutral to more alkaline soils. And one of the biggest challenges is it's one species, or there's a couple of species, Verticillium dahlia and Verticillium longisporum, and with a very broad host range. So this is some pictures from Steve that shows verticillium infecting strawberry and lettuce. So pretty much any broadleaf crop, specialty crop, is a potential host for verticillium, but all monocots are resistant. So the small grains rotations are critical if you're seeing something like verticillium show up. It can survive 8 to 10 years in the soil. So it's, if you do see it, it's worth marking that field and knowing where it is and trying to get rid of it before you spread it to the rest of your farm. Fusarium is a totally different creature. There's lots of different, in fact, Alex Stone has told me, don't consider Fusarium as one disease. It's lots and lots of different diseases. So Fusarium oxysporum is the species, but there's all these different forma specialis, or different races of Fusarium oxysporum, and they're very specific. So that's an opportunity. We can rotate from cucumber to watermelon, and if we've got the if we've got the race that infects cucumber, then it's not going to infect watermelon. So that's a whole different situation. But when you look at the disease, you can see those pictures down there. It's really difficult with your naked eye, or impossible with your naked eye, to tell the difference between Fusarium and verticillium. You need to send those into the lab to know what you're dealing with. So you actually do get very useful information from the plant clinics when they diagnose your disease. And each of these Fusarium races have, oxysporum races, they have, most of them can be spread on seed, so that's one thing, is to make sure that you've got clean seed. But their response to rotation is very different. Some need a 5 to 7 year rotation. The Rafani on radish can persist in the soil for 18 to 20 years. There are some resistant varieties available as well for some species or some races. And then, while verticillium prefers neutral to alkaline soils, Fusarium prefers slightly acidic soils to neutral soils. So there's a little bit of a shift in disease dynamics as you shift your pH. Root knot nematode got a very wide host range. There's a picture of the galls on parsnip root from last summer, and that's a small parsnip seedling that was infected on the left, and then a healthier parsnip seedling on the right that was uninfected, and that field ended up being disc under because there was such a lot of root knot nematode, and it'll infect most broadleaf vegetables. So that grower is having to figure out how to get into some sort of cereal for a couple of years to reduce the root knot nematode. The good thing with root knot nematode is it doesn't really last all that long. It doesn't survive if there's not a host plant in there. It's an obligate parasite, and it doesn't really have a resting structure like the Fusariums and verticilliums do. or can't survive in the soil without a host for as long. This is clubroot. A lot of us are familiar with that. It's got a good name, and that's what it looks like when you have when the plants start to go down to kind of a wilt on a hot summer day. And you might still get a crop off of that if you can irrigate and the infection isn't too bad, but it can also, completely destroy the crop if it's really severe. Alex Stone's been looking at the literature a lot, and she found a paper that reported that clubroot has about a 4-year half-life, which is a really useful fact, I think, to understand. When we talk about rotations, the population in the soil will be cut in half after 4 years if you're rotating out of brassicas. It is one of the really effective tools for controlling clubroot is to lime. You need to get the soil up to about 7, a pH of 7, which we don't normally have to do in the veg rotations here. And it's a little more difficult than it might meet the eye to get it up to 7 because the soil response to pH is nonlinear, so it takes a lot more lime to increase the soil from 6.9 to 7 than it does from 6 to 6.1. Yeah.
How recent is that 4-year half-life? Because I've always known it as being like a long term.
Yeah, well, that doesn't mean that. How recent is that 4-year half-life?
How recent is that information?
That information? I don't know. I don't know when that paper was published, but it's not saying that a 4-year rotation is necessarily
enough. 4-year rotation, but
yeah,
I had known if clubroot was there, it's going to take years, like 10 plus years.
Yeah, right. And if you go, so this means that in about 4 years, half the population will drop in half if there's not a host plant. But a lot of the vegetable growers here, brassicas might make up 20, 30, 40% of their rotation. So there's no way and that's the standard advice. If you've got clubroot, you need to rotate 8 to 10 years, but nobody can do that. I mean, some people can, but very few people can do that. So when you've got clubroot, you can actually manage it by liming it to some extent if you can get the pH all the way up to 7. Yeah.
Your colleague Alexandria Stone said 7.5.
7.
You need to get 7.5.
So right, well, they're working on it right now, and down in California they do get it up to 7.5. So they're actually studying that. They're also studying resistant varieties, which are available in Europe. So we could be looking at a combination of liming and using resistant varieties. Most of those aren't really available. Yeah.
So taking it up to that high pH, does that throw your soil nutrition balance out, like with magnesium and such?
If you're taking the soil up to 7 or 7.5, does the question?
With the calcium, it seems like whenever over calcium things, it's locked up other nutrition in the soil.
Mm-hmm. I think that one of the big, I don't know for sure how to answer that, but what soil scientists have told me is that with the calcium magnesium ratios, really the concern is when they're way out of whack. When you've got and I don't think that with this, I think it would be a pretty subtle effect with these kinds of changes in pH, but I'd rather defer that you ask a soil scientist that.
I would say it would maybe be proportional to the type of material that you were using, like calcium carbonate would have by far a different effect than gypsum.
Mm-hmm, right.
Gypsum would be where you can see the most magnesium.
Yeah. We'll pass it over to you. That's my last slide. So. Yeah. Oh no, it's not. I've got one more.
Let it go. I don't mean it.
Okay. Sorry, we're trying to get the comments on the speaker on the microphone here. So yeah, this is kind of obvious, I think, to a lot of people. This is information on gross returns, fixed and variable costs, and net returns for a lot of different crops. And don't look at these numbers as being absolutely correct for your situation. There's lots of different markets that have lots of different prices, obviously. I got these from the OSU Enterprise budgets. So FM means fresh market organic leaf lettuce. Gross income over $9,000 an acre. and net income about $3,800 an acre. So it's really difficult if that's the the kind of scenario that you're farming under, to switch to something like even organic sweet corn down there, second from the bottom. The net returns look a lot lower. It's an order of magnitude, and that's in addition to the challenges with equipment, challenges with expertise, infrastructure and logistics and markets. Fresh market vegetables are quite a bit more valuable. And I think that some of the work that's happening now with more specialty small grain crops, that can really change this picture. These enterprise budgets were done with, most of them were done with conventional commodity market prices.
I don't know, Pete, you might speak to that field corn number there, because I think it's about twice that, isn't it? Yeah.
I don't want to tell anybody anything. that organic sweet corn is one I don't quite yet understand. We do way better even on the field corn than that, and I mean like a lot. So yeah, I'm just wondering if that number is so low. I should be raising some lettuce, because you make like 30 grand an acre then.
Right.
Yeah. Where did you get this stuff?
That's from enterprise budgets on the OSU enterprise budgets. So that was done in 2008. But yeah, I mean, that was
orders of magnitude you're looking at.
Yeah.
It's not,
Yeah, we're not
the exact.
All right, well, I think we are able to move on to questions here. We clearly have our work cut out for us. So questions, we can take raised hands, and I will repeat them into the mic and then pass it on to the appropriate person. Anyone want to start? All right.
In regards, how about KISS it all, keep it simple. You utilize any software to plan your organization to physically locate the plants in simple rotations? And if so, what do you recommend?
The question was, is there software available that folks are using to plan their rotations, and what you may recommend? Anyone?
We don't use any software. Try to plan. It's what we basically do is just, like you say, is keep it simple. Yeah, trying to plan what we're going to be doing that far into the future, and trying. We gave up on that a long time ago, because that was it is kind of what could we raise now that we could make some money on. Where was the last time something in that family was planted here? Is there any way we can move some stuff around? That sort of thing, and trying to keep all of the, as far as the irrigation, and this is going to be a highly intensive, have to really watch the weed pressure on this crop, and that feels a little dirtier. Let's take another year or two to clean it up, that type of thing. But we don't use any software.
I would take a step there. There's the Anderson operation that I was describing that's in Othello, Washington. They work with five growers. It's mostly kind of focused on fresh market onion work, but all of their growers, they use an Excel-based format to negotiate and plan their acreage, their future acreage out at least a year ahead of time. So, with working with that many growers, that has been and become a requirement, and Excel has been a tool that he's just made work for himself, but nothing that's customized or nothing proprietary.
I will just mention that we use Excel on our farm as well, but I want to mention that the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, the USDA agency, they actually have a conservation practice to provide assistance with conservation crop rotation. Basically, it's financial and technical assistance to help you sit down and plan out your crop rotation. So that can be a little bit helpful if you need some motivation to put the time aside and think that through. And as you may or may not know, crop rotation is a required component for organic certification. So there is some element of planning that does need to take place so that you can demonstrate that. Other questions? Yes.
I have a two-part question. I guess one that I'd like you to address, and one that I would like Frank to address. Or sorry,
James.
But The first one is, when you're planting a cover crop and, you're looking at what was there before, and what the options are. Pete, are you looking primarily at labor or primarily at returns, some combination of both? And James, when you have a farmer that's looking for a proper cover crop, what are you helping them address in that choice?
The question was when we look at crop rotation and cover crop specifically, is that correct? That do we take into consideration labor as far as the,
If there's a market for it.
or if there's just a market for it? Most of our 90% of our cover crop will be dished in or flailed in. We used to do a kind of what you're alluding to. We used to plant a cover crop blend and sell it to some of the organic dairies. They requested it was a Austrian pea and triticale blend. That worked out good. That was a good crop. Part of the problem was getting that to harvest kind of made the timing wasn't quite right for us to replant something in behind it. We wanted to chase it usually with field corn, and that kind of extended our harvest out even later. But yeah, labor is a consideration in everything we do now. It is. We used to, well, yeah, we're going to have a lot of hoeing this, but we had a Wilco bill of $170,000 in chemicals, so big deal. And that was kind of how we looked at it. So our hoeing bill was much lower. Now it's getting, and of course we've increased some of our fresh market production, and that number has gotten up much larger to where those chemicals are going to be at $12, $15. It's going to cost a lot of money to hoe crops, and we're looking at a lot more mechanization. And there's a lot of really neat mechanically cultivated equipment out there, and I mean, really, they've made really leaps and bounds in that area, especially over in Europe.
As far as how I address questions from growers about wanting to plant a cover crop and whether there's a place to go for it, there's one of three things either happens. I either, like if they want to plant a cucurbit or something in between wheat, I may just give them a phone number to Stallbush Island Farms or OGC or Charlie's Produce, and they can just do that on their own, and that all works out great. And then other times, I'll get a call, and perhaps from like Doug a couple of years ago, who has a wonderful mustard, and it would work great in his rotation, but I just don't know the mustard market at all. And so I was just of no help moving Doug's mustard. And then there are other times when people want to plant Austrian field peas or camelina or something that's going to work in their rotation, and they can plant a lot of it, but the market is feed market mostly is so low that it would be ridiculous to plant it. So the Austrian field peas organic is not even 30 cents a pound. And in Pendleton, these guys would be ecstatic if they got 2,000 pounds an acre, and most of the time it's only half of that. So can you imagine going through all that for $300 an acre? They're not going to do it. And and the reason that's so low is because of stuff coming out of Canada. So I can't really do anything about that. So it's kind of hit and miss when I get inquiries about that.
Did that answer her question?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I'd like to hear a little more about the specialty bean, like the orchid bean. I've seen more folks growing those types of things, and for that small vegetable grower that's 50 acres, what is let's use the orchid bean as an example, what is that a good rotation? I mean, is that good to rotate it with brassicas, or is it gonna help them? Maybe not make money this year, but is it going to help them in their rotation?
It's going to cost a little money to keep the weeds out. Oh, I'm sorry. How does a crop like orchid beans fit in with the rotation with other crops? Is that basically the question? Yeah. It takes some effort because you're going to have to keep the weeds out between the rows there. The good thing about the specialty beans, though, is they pay a lot more than black beans or pinto beans or whatever. You're paying like $1.40 a pound instead of 80 cents. The yield on orca beans is just about the same as black beans. Some of the other specialty beans are, 2/3 of what black beans or pinot beans are, which is why the price is high. But some of the specialty beans, just nobody's growing yet, so the price is quite high. They do put a little bit of nitrogen back in the ground, but it's not like vetch or anything. I'm not sure what else to say about that. I think those specialty bean market, we got a new retail line of specialty bean products coming out here next week or something. And I think that's going to take off, and we're going to end up contracting for larger amounts of these specialty beans. But the good thing about the retail line is I don't have to have a whole bunch of it. If I do, it's great, and if I don't, it's no big deal. You just put a different bean in a bag, and it's a whole lot different than supplying truckloads of wheat or barley to a major customer. So I think there's opportunities for both the big players and the small players with the specialty bean market.
Maybe as a follow-up to that, so if you are, a smaller, and when I say smaller, like 50-acre vegetable grower, and this is something you'd consider doing, where would you even start with equipment? I mean, if we live 10 miles away from each other, I mean, if you're used to growing vegetables, I mean, whose door do you knock on? How do you approach somebody about doing contract work? What does it cost? What would that, once you get it planted, then what, James? Then you're not paying, as a vegetable grower, we pick it and clean it and take it to a farmer's market or to a wholesaler. But for beans, it's just a completely different story. So maybe
say what you do with the garden, James.
Yeah, when you're talking of a small, 50 acres is not that small, but if you're going to do 10 acres of you're going to start breaking that down into something, and that gets pretty small. And combines are expensive, swathers are expensive, and your question is, how do you facilitate the harvest of that? I would talk to a neighbor who has a swather or combine and have them come custom harvest it. And as far as the trucking goes, you don't need bulk trucks, you don't need the belly dumps. You can get these super sacks, and we call it 2,000 pounds. Mm-hmm. The big super sacks about 2,000 pounds, and one of those, and you can put that on any flatbed freight truck.
Thank you. So we have one question.
We have a question from our online audience. Do you have any cover crops that you can recommend that improve the phosphorus of the soil?
Nick?
I don't think cover crops aren't going to be bringing in new phosphorus in the system, like legumes will fix new atmospheric nitrogen and bring it into the rotation. There's some interest and work that's been done on buckwheat making phosphorus more available or bringing up phosphorus from lower horizons in the soil, and that's possible. Although the only study that I've seen on it couldn't really find a strong effect. That was done several years ago funded by SARE, but it was done in a different part of the country. So I think it does make some sort of intuitive sense to me, though, that some deep-rooted cover crops could bring up phosphorus that might not be as readily available, especially to a young or to a crop that's just getting established, because you're kind of bringing it up to the soil surface and then working with it when you're tilling in the cover crop. And sometimes that sort of early establishment phase for a crop is when they don't have a strong root system, or they maybe haven't got an association yet with mycorrhizal fungi that help to make phosphorus more available. That might be when the crops are most susceptible to phosphorus deficiencies. But in the Willamette Valley, frankly, we've got a lot of soils that have got plenty of phosphorus.
I just wanted to say, you have to have it in the subsoil in the first place to bring it up.
Yeah.
I'm down on the south coast, and sandstone-derived soil, so it's very phosphorus deficient, and so there's nothing in the subsoil to pull up.
Right.
So, question for you, James. You said that Junction City is becoming the teff capital of the world. I've heard that teff storage, harvest, storage, cleaning is very difficult because of the size of the grain and it just leaks out like water from standard equipment. How are they, what infrastructure is there to help them actually bring this crop to market, and have they had to add things?
So the question is about teff grain in particular, and it becoming a pretty significant crop in the Junction City area. Well, initially, yeah, everybody's freaked out because, wow, that's small seed. You know, the word teff means lost in the Ethiopian language, because if you drop it, well, it's lost. It's that small. But the good thing is there's several people, especially Brian Parker in Lancaster, which used to be a town in between Harrisburg and Junction City. He raises ridiculously specialty crops like petunia seed or whatever, and is really good at it and is really good at cleaning it. And so, you know, everybody initially tried to clean their own teff and then pretty much gave up and went to Brian, and then he cleaned it perfectly. So that's pretty much where it's all going right now. And then this year, Labrie Ranch down in, I think, Sutherland, Oregon, by Roseburg, they raised a considerable amount of teff this year and cleaned it themselves. They were quite late with the crop. I mean, really late. And cleaning it, But when they finally cleaned it, it came back 99.998 clean. I mean, it was cleaner even than Brian Parker's. So, yeah, I don't think that's no longer an issue. But I would not, if you don't know what you're doing, I would not clean it yourself. Yeah.
And storage isn't an issue. They got systems in place to deal with that.
No, they stored in normal grass seed warehouses, I suppose,
Wow.
or Hummingbird or whatever. Yeah.
Is that organic?
That's not most of it's not organic. We did have 5 acres of organic in Junction City last year, and it was harvested a little bit high moisture, and I think the problem was kind of ignored until a little bit late, and we lost it to rancidity. But I think if we're going to grow organic teff, we're going to have to probably do it on the east side of the mountains, because the weed pressure in the valley is too high, and teff doesn't take off real fast initially. And so if you got any broadleaf weed pressure in the teff field, you got some real issues. And even for Brian Parker, it's going to be very difficult to get pigweed or lamb's quarter seed out of teff. So that's kind of good. You can clean pretty much everything else out of it, but those two are really tough.
That teff, how is it being utilized as an end product for the consumer? So like, it's a grain, but what is it being turned into?
So the question is, how is teff being utilized by the end consumer? Most of it is ground into flour to make injera bread. That's kind of an irony. When we first started carrying teff at Hummingbird, we thought everybody's going to make injera bread, right? Including Pete, right? So well, that turned out that we started selling more grain than we were flour. We're going, where's that going? And it turned out that the University of Oregon track team was buying it, mixing it with millet because it is easily digestible and has a complete amino acid profile in it. So we're selling more grain. But lately, Camas Country Mill, that Hummingbird's pretty closely associated with down in Eugene, they're milling about 40 to 50,000 pounds of that a month for a customer in Minneapolis, and have been doing that for 2-3 years now. And we get calls at Hummingbird for just insane amount of teff, that people just want multiple truckloads of it. And I even get calls from South Africa and from Europe and Netherlands or whatever wanting it because the quality is so much better than they're growing in Africa, or especially South Africa or Ethiopia, that they just would rather have ours and ship it back. We've never done that because we can't satisfy the local demand, let alone can't even satisfy Bobby Red Mill demand, for crying out loud. But, yeah.
I have a question, just scaling it down even more, maybe Michael or Nick. Crop rotations and high tunnels. I know that's something a lot of smaller specialty crop producers struggle with because it's high value real estate, and so the tendency is to grow tomatoes and tomatoes and tomatoes. But I don't know if you've seen any models or rotations that work.
Isn't that a biodynamic principle? Tomatoes on tomatoes on tomatoes.
I have surprisingly seen a paper on rotating tomatoes after each other multiple times. I'm not sure it's biodynamic.
No, I would just say one thing, and I passed over to Nick. There's a gentleman who's here whose name's Michael Halvin, who's in Hollister, California. Who is, I think, his climate is a little bit different than ours, but he's really expanded his high tunnel operation. And so his use of winter carrots, fennel, chards, what else he's doing? He does heirloom tomatoes in them. He does do some brassicas in them. He's just, if you get a chance to talk to him, he'd be a really good resource for a system that's working. But I'm familiar with a couple of the growers that I think you're describing that do a lot with tomatoes. But I mean, I've heard of citrus. I've heard of a grower in the Cottage Grove, Eugene area who has limes and Meyer lemons under some high tunnels. So there's a lot to be done. I'd love to hear what Nick has to say.
Well, thanks very much for the simple question. I think what I would say is if I had a nickel for every time an extension agent said it depends, I'd be a wealthy guy. And I think it does depend on what kind of disease pressure or pest pressure that you're facing. So I think in a high tunnel, you're even more restricted with the crops you're willing to put into a high tunnel than you are in the field because of that, because of the cost, the investment that you've got into it. So it's even more important that if you see a problem to diagnose it, and if you can, it's worth there probably even more than in the field, roguing out, a fungal disease that you might see popping up, or looking at it. If you do have something that's building up, then you might end up having to move your high tunnel. But diagnosis really is the critical point.
Where can people find where to send samples to for diagnosis?
In Oregon is the OSU Plant Clinic, and I think it's about a $60 fee. So it's pretty good value, for the information that you're getting. But yeah, I've seen one of the other issues I've seen happening in high tunnels when the high tunnel is in the same location for 10 or more years is that you can often get the soil gets kind of loved to death, and we add quite a bit of manure or compost, fertilizer. So, and in the Willamette Valley in the winter in open fields, we get a lot of flushing, so we don't really have a big problem with salt buildup. But that's not true in a high tunnel. And I've seen a couple of situations where salt levels built up in the soil, and all they've been able to do to bring that site back is to take the plastic off for the winter.
All right. Well, with that, we will conclude this workshop. Thanks for joining us today, and thank you to the panel.
So thanks everyone for joining us, and we hope you can come back later and see the soil health workshop.